Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What's going on, everybody? This is Adam Caplan, the voice in your ears with AC Radio, and I'm pretty pumped today. We're going to be talking a little bit about Jake Paul versus Hasim Rahman Jr., and we're actually going to get to a little bit of an AC Radio Q&A afterwards, so I'm pretty excited about that. Had a couple of folks send me some great questions all around the spectrum. You know, some of them how I keep my hair so fresh and so clean, and then, you know, more generic questions, how I got involved into MMA and boxing in terms of a fan or as a participant. And then, you know, just as before I hit the record button, I got hit with a pretty tough question in which are the top 5 most underrated MMA fighters that I would, you know, bring to your attention. So that was a tough one. I don't know if I'm ready for that one right off the dome, but I'm looking at the clock right now, and it's about 12:30, so you know what that means. Gonna get a nice cold one in you, a little wild cherry Happy Dad. Shout out to the Money Buys Happiness podcast, who just got signed to Full Send. You know, they're going to be presented and powered by Full Send. Big Canadian podcast, 2 fellas from Toronto, Ernesto and Anthony. Congratulations, guys, on the big signing. I know that you guys had John on recently. It was a fantastic podcast in John Shahidi, the president, and you know, co-CEO, I guess you could call it, of Full Send. So congratulations to them, Money Buys Happiness. They're on to bigger and better things. You know, they set a great precedence during the pandemic of not staying in Toronto, saying, fuck this, the pod is on to bigger and better things. Let's pack our bags, move out to Miami, start meeting with bigger and better guests in person, and let's get this pod off of the ground running even more. And that's exactly what they did. You know, they had Kyle on a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago. This episode blew the fucking roof off of their viewership, and I'm just so happy to see more content creators, more podcasters from Canada specifically getting their notoriety and getting their notice. So this one's for you, boys. Congratulations to the Money Buys Happiness podcast, and who knows? So, you know, first thing we got, man, we got Jake Paul versus Hasim Rahman Jr. I mean, first of all, how the hell did we get to this fight? We were supposed to have Tommy Fury. And again, we've got Tommy fumbles. Tommy fumbles the bag, and here we are. We have Jake Paul calling in Hasim Rahman Jr. on late notice to fill in for a big role as the main event at Madison Square Garden August 6th. So how did we get to this point? I mean, first of all, Tommy couldn't get into America. You know, the biggest speculation is the fact that his brother has been closely affiliated with the mafia right now, which is probably the reason why Tommy Fury couldn't get into the country. But more importantly, how did we get to Hasim Rahman Jr.? And how we got there is that Jake Paul, first of all, and Hasim were sparring partners. Hasim Rahman Jr. helped Jake Paul prepare for the Nate Robinson fight. Okay? Which is kind of interesting. You're like, how the hell did a heavyweight in Hasim Rahman Jr. with over 100 amateur fights and a 12-0 record at the time help Jake prepare for Nate Robinson? Well, that just goes to show you that Jake has been taking his sparring quite seriously, even when his opponents weren't up to the task, even when they weren't up to par. You know, so this is how Hasim was the easiest pick for Jake, is the fact that they've already had prior experience in combat against each other, number one. And number two, also looks like it could be a beatable opponent for Jake Paul. You know, this matchup reminds me very closely to the matchup of Tommy Fury versus Daniel Buchansky. Okay, Daniel Buchansky was a Polish fighter who had a 10-1 record. So on paper, is a boxer and has a great record. And Hasim Rahman Jr. is no different. He's got a 12-1 record with a wealth of boxing experience, but I can't say that that 12-1 record lines up with the skill set that Hasim Rahman Jr. has. He has fought in a lot of opponents with losing records, except for his last opponent in Jamie Mackenzie Morrison, who's Tommy Morrison's son. Okay, and he lost that fight. He got knocked out, or he got TKO'd. You know, he wasn't out cold, but he refused to answer that 10 count. So the reason why this fight is going on is not only is Hasim Rahman Jr. a 12-1 boxer, but he's also not necessarily up to the standard. And I know that that might be discrediting Jake Paul, but guys, you don't understand this. When you are going on to your 6th fight in your boxing career and you're fighting a guy who with a 12-1 record, that is unprecedented. Okay, that doesn't happen. Usually there should be fights with Jake Paul with guys with losing records, but he's not going that route. Why? Because he can't afford to. He's already known as being a guy who's a fake boxer. So he needs to go out there in his 6th fight and fight a guy with a winning record who not only is a pro boxer, not only has amateur experience, but is also actually a heavyweight. Rahman Jr. is cutting down to the cruiserweight division to meet Paul. Okay, and on top of that, Jake Paul put in a rehydration clause, which means that Rahman Jr. cannot weigh heavier than 215 pounds in the ring. And I know what everyone's thinking. Here goes the games. Here goes the antics. No wonder Jake is fighting this guy. Listen, it's part of the game, baby. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Jake Paul is not only the spectacle of the show, but he's also the main promoter. Of course he's going to put these clauses in order. First of all, he has no business fighting a heavyweight, number one. And number two, he's running the damn show. He's fighting in it. He's promoting it. He is working on his own brand in multiple facets of the boxing industry, of the fight game per se. So of course he's going to let these things in order. Is it cool? Not really. But does it make sense? Absolutely it does. Why wouldn't you handpick an opponent that you have previous experience against in the sparring realm, number one, who poses a 12-1 record, number two, who is bigger, stronger, and has more boxing experience, number three, but lastly, number four, which is the most important one of them all, and this one was even backed by Hasim Rahman Sr., okay, which is his father, by the way. Hasim has underperformed and underprepared for all of his pro fights. So his father and head coach says. And that is reason number four and the most important reason of them all why Jake has selected this fighter. Because not only does he have a great record, not only is he bigger physically, not only does he have more experience in the sport, but he's also a guy that doesn't necessarily rise to the occasion and take his craft perhaps as seriously as his father once did. And you could have all the haters, you know, oh, look at this guy, he's dick riding Jake Paul, this and that. Not really, because what I just said would actually rattle Jake and Hasim equally, you know. But this is exactly why the fight is going on. Very similar to what the Fury family did with Tommy Fury, is that they are putting him in the ring with a capable fighter with a winning record and very few losses, but at the same time know that they're not fighting a future world champion. Know that they're fighting a guy who has beaten journeymen and fighters with losing records and tomato cans, etc., but pose for a strong record of their own. And that's exactly why this fight is happening. You know, we saw in the press conference that Rahman Jr. was getting quite emotional when it came to talking about how much he was getting paid, the fact that there was a rehydration clause, and the fact that Jake is stirring the pot and saying that I beat the shit out of you in sparring. And Rahman Jr. is saying, dude, you told me that I couldn't switch to southpaw, which is something that Hasim likes to do in his fights, which is switch southpaw, number one. Okay. Number two, you told me that I had to tone down the power and I had to tone down the skill level. And now you're rubbing it in my face that you beat me up. What is with you, man? You lowball me on the pay. You give me handicaps in sparring and then use it against me. And then you tell me that I can't rehydrate. Fuck you, bro. You're a phony. You're not a real boxer. If anything, this is validating how you're not a real boxer. And you could see that there were moments that it was getting under Jake's skin and, you know, it was starting to bother him and he was getting a little bit of quiet. And then my favorite experts came out of nowhere were the body language experts. Look at Jake. He's sitting there. He's frail. He's tired. He's bitter. He's upset. He doesn't want to be there. Bullshit. Bullshit. We have seen it before in the Paul brothers. When they're sitting there quietly, they are deep in their thoughts. There's a reason why these two brothers are multi-millionaires. It's probably because the monkey in here and the genius in here never shuts the fuck off. which is why when he's sitting there, he looks like he wants to be somewhere else, because literally in his mind, when Jake is not talking, he is somewhere else. And I credit that to the mastermind and the genius in Jake Paul. And I also credit that to the fact that when you're sitting there getting chirped, what are you supposed to do? You know what I mean? You're going to sit there and smile? Not really. You're going to sit there, you're going to absorb it, you're going to digest it, and you're going to take it. You're going to move on with it. And that's exactly what happened. So, you know, another press conference where, you know, Jake Paul again was saying how I'm going to end you, I'm a world beater, I'm the future, but then also posed for another famous bet. If Jake Paul beats Hasim Rahman Jr., and I think it's more specifically by knockout, but I could be wrong, he bet Rahman that he must change his handle on social media to "I let my dad down," which to me is pretty jokes because, you know, Hasim Rahman Sr. is a former heavyweight champion, beat the likes of Lennox Lewis, you know, which was a huge moment in history and a moment in history that'll go down in the Rahman family legacy forever in time. And, you know, that was the bet that he posed for him. Look, I'm not the biggest fan of the bets. I find it waters the whole I'm serious into boxing thing down. Find it waters it down a little bit. And I also find that as much as I like consistency in the shit talk and the antics and the performances, I find after a while it's kind of like, all right, man, like we don't need to worry about the bets. We don't need to worry about the prop bets. Let's just focus on the fight and get on with our lives. So, you know, I'm not a big fan of the bets, but, you know, press conference was what it was. Couple of moments where both fighters were getting a little bit too emotional, and it was like, all right, guys, let's settle down, you know. But what I love about the podcast, the press conferences with Jake Paul, what I love about them is that his opponents always peel the curtain on Jake Paul, what it's like working with him behind the scenes. You know, what is the chatter that goes on behind the scenes within the fight game that involves Jake Paul? There's always a little story that gets told with every press conference and interview with Jake Paul's opponents that they bring to the table. And that, to me, is always the most important part about watching, because you learn a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And although I could sit here and say, hey, you know, yeah, of course you chose him. He's got a 12-1 record. He's not even that great of a boxer. Oh, yeah, of course you asked the heavyweight to cut down weight, so he's going to be low energy. And then on top of that, you did the rehydration process. I'd love to sit here and play all of those cards. But when you are fighting and promoting and also sharing and spreading the love to all of the fighters on your undercard with their money, bro, I'm kind of like, dude, do what the fuck you want. Do what you want. Jake was not the first fighter to put in a rehydration clause, and he will not be the last. And I understand that the IBF association is usually the most guilty association of the rehydration clause, but at the same time, ladies and gentlemen, this is a power move. And this is what happens when you sign the dotted line against Jake Paul. You are not only fighting Jake, you are fighting the contract, you are fighting the antics, and you are fighting the viewership and the fans that support Jake Paul. And that's what makes this a hell of a lot more difficult. And then when you're stepping in the ring and you realize this motherfucker made me walk into the ring at 204 pounds, made me cut weight, so already physically I don't feel that great, and then financially he fucked me, he's paying me the lowest amount of money out of all of his opponents, and I'm the real boxer. So now he's playing on him mentally. So when you sign that dotted line against Jake Paul, you better be ready for everything, because not only is he the man against you in that ring, but he's also the guy that is cashing your and signing your checks. And there goes the sound of the bell, so we're back in it again. When you sign that dotted line against Jake Paul, like I said, you better be ready for everything. You better be ready to get into those financial wars. You better get ready for the smack talk. You better get ready for the social media bets. You better get ready for the financial bets or the monetary bets. You better get ready for rehydration clauses. You better get ready for every disadvantage. Okay? Because when you sign that dotted line against Jake Paul, and he is putting his reputation on the line and his notoriety and his boxing career, he is going to throw the rule book at you. He is going to override his power as a fighter and put on his promoter hat and present those disadvantages to you. And I understand, well, then why the hell would fighters sign the dotted line? Well, because you're going to get more notoriety, more fame, and, you know, not always, I'd like to think it, more money than you will fighting anybody else. And even though Rahman Jr. is the lowest earning fighter that Paul has fought in, number one, on the flip side, he's probably the least popular. You're telling me that Gibb, Nate Robinson, Ben Askren, and Tyron Woodley are less popular than Rahman Jr.? Fuck no. Of course they're more popular. So that's why you're getting paid less money. And then on top of that, you're also the most dangerous, so I got to get under your skin a little bit more. So that's why they're paying him a little bit less. So when you sign that dotted line against Jake Paul, you are basically reserving the right, fumbled there. You are reserving the right to, you know, get the rule book thrown at you and all that bullshit thrown at you. But at the same time, you also reserve the right to get more notoriety, more notice, more views, and more fans than you could have ever gotten. And on top of that, you sign that dotted line to have the ability and the capacity to knock Jake Paul the fuck out and put him in his place and be the guy in history that shut Jake Paul up. And that, to me, could take your career further and further than any international belt can. Why? Because we are in the boxing era of entertainment now. And it's not always going to be about the best fighting the best, but it's going to be who's going to put more asses in the seats, who's going to get you more entertained and more excited for the matchups. So although there are all of the obstacles that Jake Paul could throw at you, there will always be one remaining gift at the end of that rainbow. And that is to be the guy to shut Jake Paul up. And that, to me, is exactly the reason why folks watch Jake Paul, is to watch him lose. And that's why they watch Floyd, and that's why they watched McGregor. And on the flip side, should Jake Paul accomplish this challenge and beat Hasim Rahman Jr. and even beat him by knockout, those same people will be the same people to continuously discredit Jake Paul. And unfortunately, that will always follow him throughout the course of his career, which is why he is going to have to raise the bar and raise the bar and raise the bar. But because Jake is not only a fighter, but he's also a promoter, he is always going to find a way to make that cream rise to the top. And when I'm talking cream, I'm talking cash, rules, everything around me. And that's what Jake Paul generates. He generates money. He is a money printing machine. Hasim Rahman Jr. is getting the challenge and the opportunity to fight a fighter who made $40 million last year and fought nobody. And here we are. July, I can't believe I butchered it. August 6th, Jake Paul versus Hasim Rahman Jr. It's July 17th. That's why I did that. All questions will be answered. Is Jake capable of fighting real boxers? Number one. And number two, did he bite off more than he could chew in challenging Hasim Rahman Jr.? So that's what I got for you on the Jake Paul Hasim, on the Hasim jive. Fumbling my words today. Got to maybe get some electrolytes in me. And that's the beauty of these solo shows. I just go off, man. I got the spit flying everywhere. I'm fumbling on my words. I got to repronounce things, etc. Not easy being on here alone, but I wouldn't change it for the fucking world. I love it. Every single Sunday, I'm here on AC Radio. I got the lights on me in the studio that I built, and I'm sitting in front of the mic. And, it's just a dream come true to be able to do, whether I get 50 views, 200 views, or 50,000 views. Every time we hit that stop button on the podcast, until the moment I release the Tuesday, it's a sprint. Those 3 days go by, people don't even realize. And the reason why I'm laying that one up is because we're going to be doing our first segment today, a little Q&A action on AC Radio. So I'm really honored and really touched by the people that did write me some questions. Even had my wife ask me a few of them, and I will say that my wife's questions are probably better than everybody else's. And no, I'm not shy to admit that my wife is going to be part of the Q&A segment. Why? Because, when you're first starting out, when you're first trucking, when you're first trying to find your way in the game or in any game, it's always your family that's going to get you to help you, fumbling again. It's always your family that's going to help you. It's always your family that's going to help you get to the top. It's always your family that's going to help you when no one else is around. So, of course, I'm going to include her questions, and I'm looking forward to them. So let's get right into that Q&A segment. First one I'm going to start off with is an easy one. First question is from my boy, Justin. What made you get into the boxing and MMA world? Well, first off, I mean, I started off as a huge WWF and a huge WWE fan. I love the beef. I love the smack talk. I love the physicality and I love the intensity. But most importantly, I love the storylines and the entertainment. And when I first started watching the UFC specifically, and I saw, Chuck Liddell versus Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz versus Ken Shamrock, not only did I get the physicality, but I also got the storylines. And then on top of that, this shit is real. It ain't fake. So I was like, I have to watch more of this. And every weekend I would religiously pull up to Blockbuster and rent out old Pride DVDs and old UFC DVDs. I remember when Nick Diaz fought Robbie Lawler recently, people thought that was the first time they were fighting. Hell to the no. I remember watching the first time those guys fought in the early 2000s. I remember that. And now you fast forward to 2022 and these guys are fighting again. I'm like, holy fucking shit. The kid inside of me is going absolutely crazy right now. So, how I got into the boxing and MMA world was actually, from being a WWE/WWF fan, love the storylines, love the physicality, love the intensity. And then when I got my hands on a Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz fight or George St. Pierre versus Matt Hughes in 2006, it took my heart and ran with it. I will forever be indebted to guys like George St. Pierre, guys like Chuck Liddell, guys like Nick Diaz, because they roped me into this game. And now I've had beautiful opportunities because of it. I fought in Thailand in a Thai festival about an hour away from civilization and society. I've got to interview great UFC fighters. I've got to start my own podcast. I've built my business, as you could see, coaching boxing as well, to fitness enthusiasts, etc. So that's how I got into the game of MMA. It was just, a couple of glances at the TV and I fell in love. So great question, Justin. Appreciate you, fam. Moving on. My man, Jay Fish, what separates the champion level fighters from the guys who are just below them? Great question. Love that question. I mean, look, I've said it before when I was talking about Justin Gaethje. What separates the champions from the fighters below them are the ones on the MMA side, at least, are the guys that know how to tie everything together. They don't work their kickboxing, their boxing, their wrestling, and their jiu-jitsu separately. They set their grappling up with their strikes. Or they set their strikes up with their grappling. So that, to me, is what makes the best fighters in MMA, are the guys that know how to tie in their striking with their grappling. Okay, and typically the guys that know how to do that also have the best gas tanks and probably have the best work ethic. So that's my answer. What separates the champions from the guys below are the fighters that know how to tie in their striking with their grappling. Great question, Jay Fish. Appreciate you, baby. Next one. If you were not a personal trainer, what would you do and why? Great question. Very difficult for me to answer because I guess I'm doing it right now as we speak. If I wasn't in coaching and if I wasn't in personal growth and helping people achieve goals and helping people overcome fears and challenges that they set for themselves, I'd want to be in media. I'd want to be in radio. I'd want to be in podcasting. My first love will always be radio. Love the audio game. I got it popping. I got the slick back hair, got the black tee on. You know what I'm saying? I got it popping. I'm not an ugly dude. But at the same time, I love being in my PJs and spitting game at the same time. And when you're on radio, ain't nobody can see you. So it's fun that way. But if I wasn't a personal trainer, I'd love to be a radio host, love to be a podcaster. And I guess you could say I'm trying to, build that segue from personal training to podcasting as we speak right now. So appreciate you, Doug. Great question. And that's exactly what I would be doing because, I can't say I couldn't possibly be in a better position to not only earn money and make my own schedule and be a business owner, but I also get the opportunity to learn and help and grow from my clientele while I'm helping them grow. So, you know, there's nothing else possibly I could be in terms of the helping people department more than actually coaching, you know, and one of my biggest blessings is using sport and exercise, bridging that gap between sport and exercise into helping people become the best versions of themselves by breaking down barriers, etc., has been a dream come true. And I wouldn't want to do it any other way. Wouldn't want to be a therapist, wouldn't want to be a social worker or any of those things. And, you know, that's what I would want to do is be a radio host or be a professional podcaster. Great question, Doug. Next one. From my lovely wife. What would you say is the most iconic historical boxing fight? Great question, Boo. I have to say the most historical and iconic boxing fight is Muhammad Ali versus George Foreman, the Rumble in the Jumble. The Rumble in the Jumble. Could you believe that? Guy lays up a fucking A1 answer and says Jumble. Unreal. But we move on. The Rumble in the Jungle, baby. That's the best fight. That is the most iconic fight in history. Okay. And I could make a separate podcast breaking that down and explaining it. But the reality is that George Foreman was one of the biggest, scariest killers in the heavyweight division at that time, and probably will go down as that for the remainder of time. But at the same time, Muhammad Ali was not only one of the best boxers to ever grace us, but was also one of the most influential people on the planet. Stood up for himself, stood up for his people, you know, marched through Zaire with all of the locals, and you know, really built a sense of belief inside of every one of those people. And that to me is why it's one of the most iconic fights. And then you add into the fact that Muhammad Ali finished George Foreman with his iconic rope-a-dope, and that was all she wrote. So that to me is definitely the most iconic boxing fight in history. And then, you know, her next question was, looking at boxing, MMA, and wrestling, what would you say is the common thread between each discipline aside from physical battle? What is the most common form of discipline? I mean, work ethic. Comes down to work ethic. If you are not waking up every single day, dedicating your life to your craft, whether it's boxing, MMA, or wrestling, you will never excel anywhere past participation, plain and simple. The reason, the disciplines that these all share is the work ethic. You have to wake up every single fucking day, work on your fundamentals, work on your technique, get your runs in, be on point with your nutrition, and be strong up here mentally. That to me is the most shared discipline. And then on top of that, what are the three things of those three sports that rope in a fan? Comes down to the storylines. Fans love getting behind a fighter. They love getting behind a wrestler. They love getting behind somebody that they could identify with. They love getting behind someone that touches their heart. Okay, so that's the commonality between the three in terms of that side. On what drives a fan to putting his eyes on the fucking screen is storylines and promotions, because that's when you learn about the fighter, that's when you learn about the wrestler, and that's when your heart makes the choice on who they wish to follow and support for the rest of their career. Great question. Moving on, what do we got here? Should Miesha Tate retire after going 1-2 in her comeback so far? Well, I mean, look, great question, Andy, my homie from the Drew Experience. Great podcast, 80% combat sports, 20% everything else. I got you, baby. Listen, man, what it comes down to is that Miesha Tate said that she was going to go into the octagon on Saturday in Long Island, New York, and be the mama bear. Ain't nobody was going to beat her in front of her kids while they were watching live. And quite frankly, she got beaten and she didn't really show that much intensity. However, she still is a legend in the women's MMA game. And on top of that, is trying her hand in the flyweight division at 125 pounds now. So you know what, Andy? I'd say one more. let's give Misha one more fight. You know, she fought another tough veteran like herself in Lauren Murphy. Let's maybe see her go a little bit lower down on the pecking order and see what she still got left in the tank. And should she pass that test, I say we let her keep going. But otherwise, I would like to see Miesha Tate retire then if she's not going to perform to her highest capability and standard that we've seen before in the octagon. So I would definitely say that we've got at least one more fight in Miesha Tate left. And then the last question goes to my man, Coach Corey. He asked me, who are 5 of the most underrated or underrated MMA fighters? Now, I don't always like to use the term underrated because sometimes that means unpopular fighters, like fighters that we don't know about that are doing well. So I also like to put a slash on this question in terms of underrated / prospects. Okay, and I've got a couple of them for you right off the dome. And you know, some of you are going to give me flack for this because a lot of these fighters are already quite known and do have a little bit of notoriety, but a lot of you are going to base that off of the fact that we've probably just seen these fighters fight and they fought on a big pay-per-view. So you know them because it's a very recent factor. But let's see in 6 months from now if you're going to be thinking of most of these fighters. I don't know if you are. So right off the bat, we have Alex Pereira. I mean, the guy who's going to be fighting Israel Adesanya for the UFC's middleweight title. He's underrated in the sense that not a lot of people necessarily knew what he was really capable of in the octagon due to the fact of the grappling. You know, they knew that he was a killer on the stand-up, let's be real here. But the fact that now in MMA, you could take somebody down and you could hold them down or you could try to submit them, we didn't really know where he's coming from. But after beating Sean Strickland in devastating fashion, and now he's next in line to fight Israel Adesanya, I gotta say, do your fucking homework on Alex Pereira. Okay? And that's what I consider a prospect or somebody who's underrated, a fighter that you haven't gone back on YouTube and watched his history, his documentaries, his interviews, and his past fights to get to know these fighters. Everybody's seen all of Nate's old fights. Everybody's seen all of McGregor's new fights. But have you seen all of Pereira's fights? I doubt it. So go back and look at them, because he might be your next UFC champion. So that's someone I'm putting on watch. After that, I'm putting Ian Gary on watch. I mean, look, another guy who just had an emphatic performance against Gabe Green at UFC 276. Why am I putting him? First of all, he's been looking better and better with every performance, number one. Number two, you know, he's only had about 3 fights in the UFC, so he's relatively young. And number 3, he's another Irish prospect that we have been longing for since the notorious one in Conor McGregor. So that's why I'm putting Ian Gary on the list. He is underrated. I think that folks think he's actually, in fact, overrated. I've got to say he's underrated. We have yet to witness the real greatness and potential of Ian Gary. Next, we have Casey O'Neill. She's a fantastic, fantastic fighter. I got a lot of hope on Casey O'Neill. So, you know, has been training at Tiger Muay Thai forever, a New Zealand-born fighter, or I believe Australian. She, you know, was supposed to put on a huge fight, but I believe broke her nose. That's another one. And then I'm gonna actually stop it at 4. I've got to go. Well, actually, you know what? I'll go for 5. I've got my man Shavkat. You know me at AC Radio. I've been butchering names lately. I'm like Brendan Schaub when usually I'm like Ariel Helwani. Shavkat Rakhmonov from Kazakhstan. Guy's an absolute fucking killer. That's another guy that you need to watch. And then lastly, I'm going to go with Sean Brady. Sean Brady is someone who's climbing the ranks, somebody who's going to be a top 10 fighter if he isn't already. You know, has a fucking 1 grappling, a guy that you need to watch out for in the division. So that's my top 5. You know, a lot of these people, yes, I could have went off and named people on PFL, could have named people on One Championship or Bellator, or maybe even on the lower ranks. But you know what? I know my viewers and I know the audience that I speak to, and I know a lot of you guys are UFC based. So I was going to give you more of a UFC based answer. Coach Corey, man, from New Brunswick, appreciate you, baby. Love the shit out of that question, and that's all I got for you today on AC Radio. I mean, look at this happy dad thing is fucking sweating like my forehead. Tastes delicious. Got the wild cherry in there. Shout out to my brother bringing it back from Miami, Florida. You know, heaven on earth, as they say now. And, you know, look, man, we had a great Q&A segment. I had a great time doing it. I hope you learned a little bit about me as well. And every other week or every week, I'm looking forward to getting more questions answered, more questions being asked. And then I'm looking forward to answering more questions. And let me finish off this happy dad. AC Radio, thanks for tuning in. We got Jake Paul and Hasim Rahman August 6th. Hope you like the breakdown. Hope you like the analysis. Hope you like the storyline as to what brought us to the dance at Madison Square Garden August 6th. And again, I thank everybody for the Q&A. Enjoy your happy dad. Have a happy Sunday. Have an even better Monday and Tuesday. And AC Radio, don't forget to subscribe. We're out.